Why, hello there. It is 88 days until the Shadow of the Erdtree comes out, and this is the Elden Wait countdown. I have a guest, my good friend Kosmos on YouTube, Kosmos ER, who does wonderful lore videos and has done some very good analysis and predictions about the DLC. So we basically hype about Shadow of the Erdtree for roughly an hour. It's a really fun discussion. Please check out Kosmos if you haven't yet on YouTube. I'll have the link in the description. Enjoy. Your content, like everything that you've done, basically the body of your work on YouTube, feels like it was almost leading up to the DLC. Like because you covered America extensively and all that, and so
Yeah,
you must be feeling pretty good about the direction of Shadow of the Erdtree at the moment.
I'm feeling pretty alright about it for sure. The only video I would have wished I made was I wanted to make an Omen video at some point, but I won't have time to, slide
Yeah,
it in before the DLC, sadly.
yeah,
But yeah, other than that, I feel like I talked about most of the things that would probably be relevant to the DLC, honestly. So yeah.
yeah. I was listening back through your videos over the last few days, and you know, it's funny. Even before we knew literally anything about the DLC, you were talking about the Colosseums, which was not a difficult guess, but it
Yeah.
was a good one. And then everything else that followed it, I had to keep reminding myself that we hadn't seen the teaser image yet. I was like, man, just really killing it because I don't think anything's really been wiped off the table from that video. I think it's all
Mm.
like there's some stuff with maybe Scarlet Rot, which may not come in, but it's not even totally out because there's a dancer in the trailer. So who
Yeah, I
knows? Like
know.
it's so funny how it's just like you can't roll
Yeah.
out anything. And but before diving into the Shadow of the Erdtree, I'm just curious because I know
Mhm.
these releases are very sacred to people. They're sacred to me, and a lot of people I've talked with, people treat From Software releases as this pretty holy thing. So when something like Shadow of the Erdtree is coming out, are you making plans around it, or do you just download it and like get into it, or like what? Do you have any plans right now, just as like a player?
I had plans before we even knew the DLC was happening. So yeah, I'm obviously just gonna be taking like a few days off depending on when it releases. I think it's maybe on a weekend. So, just taking the Friday, Monday,
Yeah.
usually what I do for these like really big. I'm doing this for Dragon's Dogma tomorrow too. So
Yes. Yeah.
so yeah. And then beyond that, in terms of like actual playthrough, I have been super like I have been thinking about this for more than a year at this point. I I really okay, first things first, I'm gonna do the run on New Game Plus 7. I
Okay.
did it
Wow.
once.
Yeah.
Yeah, the I believe it was like the first time I saw it done was I think it was like in 2016 or 15. I was watching like Piv over on Twitch, who's a big Souls PvP streamer, and he did his first playthrough of the Old Hunter in New Game Plus 4 or something like that. And ever since, I've been doing like the DLC releases in New Game Plus 7, just because I I have fairly complete characters that are like pretty well built usually by the time the DLC comes out because I do like some PvP.
Yeah.
And so like just playing the DLC on just the higher new game cycle, I found is usually a bit more satisfying than just doing it on the base new game. Like it gets a bit meatier. And
Hmm.
what you remember when the Ashes of Ariandel came out and people were complaining that it was a bit short.
Yeah.
Um, it was
Yes.
not short for me.
Yeah, I
It was not
remember
short for me.
Armored Core 6 came out. Like you kind of gave yourself a challenge mode, and that was a whole new game. But you were trying to S rank each mission as you went through,
Oh
right?
yeah. And that was a bit that I might have been a bit over ambitious. It wasn't that bad. It was pretty challenging for sure, especially because it was my first Armored Core game. But I think the issue at the end I ran into was that it took me so long to S rank some missions
Yeah.
But I didn't want to put the time in anymore because I just wanted to know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because the the story ramps up towards like the, I guess, the last third so much.
It does.
I don't want to spend like 5 hours trying to S rank this mission. I just want to know what happens.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
still haven't
makes sense.
fully S ranked the end of the game. I still have to come back to Armored Core. I haven't done New Game Plus and New Game Plus 2,
Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah,
But yeah, I eventually have to come back.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's just it's funny how because you want that challenge, you don't want to feel like you're cheating yourself out of that first time experience because I think we all played our first Souls game or whatever and it was brutal and we were like I just need this for the rest of my life now.
I think, yeah, the challenge is very important. I think the Souls games are usually fairly challenging in general. You don't have to do them on New Game Plus 7, even for a veteran. But the playing it on New Game Plus 7 just really makes things sink in for me.
Yeah.
I really learn the boss. I really get to
Mm.
appreciate and stare at his moves for days at a
Yeah.
time. So because you're not gonna get that first playthrough experience any other time. For
Yeah.
example, with Elden Ring, obviously it was a huge game, so you don't need to do something like that to artificially extend your experience. But with the DLC, even though for Elden Ring is going to be pretty big, you really really want to savor it, especially with how, if you consider just the rhythm of the output from software has like recently. It's not what it
Yeah.
used to be back in 2014.
True.
So you're gonna have to really really take your time with this because you're not getting any more Elden Ring for a very long time after that.
Yeah, that's a good point. After this, who knows? Miyazaki. I feel like there's a little bit of corporate speak in his answer about Elden Ring, even though I was
Yeah.
surprised to compare it to Dark Souls 3 because that's a little bit more final sounding than I was sort of expecting. But either way, from software, yeah, it's not the golden era of like 2014 to 2016 where every year there was like a game that we're still talking about like 10 years later, coming out.
Every 6 months at that point, if you
Uh,
count the DLCs
yeah,
too. Yeah,
just
that was
insane.
something else.
Yeah, you got Dark Souls 2
Yeah.
twice. You got Bloodborne. Dark Souls 3 is just crazy.
Dark Souls 2 came out in, what was it, 2014, and then like 4 months later you get 3 DLCs.
Yeah, it's just wild. Yeah. And I'm curious cuz your content, you're not too worried necessarily about getting in there right away when new content drops cuz you tend to take a more long view approach cuz you really let your theories and stuff
Mhm.
simmer, but do you have any content plans for the DLC or are you worrying about that secondary to just experiencing it?
I absolutely do not have any sort of content planned for the DLC.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just gonna. I think it's just good to let the ideas and the theories like just sit for a
Mhm.
while. Over time, no matter how thorough you get, you're gonna be missing stuff. You're gonna learn new information. Your opinions are gonna change. So like sometimes you learn stuff from other members of the community, from some meta narrative stuff from outside of the game, or
Yeah.
some piece of dialogue or lore or item you just didn't know about, or some interaction. So usually, just it's probably good practice to let things
Yeah.
sit for a while, but also just I feel like the theories get mature and get more developed the more you think about them, so you have more things to say at the end of the day. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely not planning anything like for any time, like for at least like 3 months after DLC, basically.
Yeah, that's a
I
healthy way to approach it, I think, is because I've been
mhm,
all over the place with it, and I think both you and I are, being more lore and story focused too. Like you said, you gotta sit with it. Your initial
mhm.
impressions aren't usually what you end up with necessarily.
Yeah, for sure. I also have a huge backlog of videos that, due
Yeah,
to my horrendous output over these last 2 years, I couldn't get out. I'm trying to squeeze in a few videos before the DLC, just because I have a feeling they won't be any more relevant after the DLC. So I'm trying to get them out since things will change after that.
yeah,
But yeah, beyond that, I just have like so many things on my list to get through. Even if I release videos after DLC, I'll first start with like stuff I had in the backlog.
yeah. I think that's a good approach to just sit with it. And I'm also someone where you do some streaming for it, but I can't stream my initial playthroughs. I think that's just embarrassing and tedious for everyone. I've learned my lesson trying to show my blind playthroughs because
Mm.
I read the item descriptions, think about stuff, but it's very much not like geared toward entertainment. So it's for me as it should be, I think. So
Yeah, the streams have been fun, but I don't think I would stream it either, just because well, two reasons. First of all, I think there won't be much people watching. Any people who would be interested probably would be playing the DLC and or
that's true.
wouldn't want to
Yeah,
be spoiled.
yeah,
And there's also part of it is you're not gonna get just as immersed. You will be too worried about the show you're giving,
hmm
and interacting with people. So you won't be as immersed into the experience if you stream at the same time, I feel.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that is some people's content output, but not for me. As fun as it can be, I like to also be a little better because regardless of how good you are, and I think you're much better at these games than I am, you'll have some backseat people. It's just inevitable anytime you stream. I remember streaming the
Yeah.
network test, and I was not doing so well against the Crucible Knight initially, and people were losing their minds. But I was also playing around with the some of the shield, whatever the shield Ash of
Mhm.
War was. Like I was just messing around, but people were losing their mind because I wasn't doing it the right way, and the game wasn't even out yet. So
Yeah, I was recently I did a stream where I finished my New Game Plus 7 playthrough. It was the first time I actually did New Game Plus 7 on Elden Ring. It was in preparation for the DLC, and I was sitting there fighting Millennia for like 5 hours. And I'm using a fairly like not very objectively good build. I like my build to be more thematic with some nice fashion and some cool weapon rather than just be
yeah,
good, like with heavy armors or whatever is the meta these days after all the nerfs.
right.
And then even though it was obviously meant to be that, and I'm running a quality build, which is one of the worst builds in Elden Ring, I get people coming in telling me, why is he using this shit build for New Game Plus 7? It's absolutely awful. But yeah, I believe you said something about preparing, like doing a character for preparing for the DLC. Are you gonna
Yeah.
stream that at all?
I've been including clips of it in some of my Elden Wait videos because for whatever reason I can't avoid this thing where I like to do daily videos, which this is part of the Elden Wait. So I guess we're
Yeah.
all implicated at this point. But I'm not just because I'm also very much messing around. I'm trying to play through it sort of not hurrying up and not going super slow, but meandering a bit, just like trying to. It's been a while since I've had an organic playthrough of Elden Ring, so I'm just letting myself have that very organic experience and just peeking into things and not looking stuff up to remind myself where I need to go get like the bells and stuff like that. Just sort of
Yeah.
trying to rediscover the world a little bit in that like playthrough experience.
Mhm. There's also you can make it a lore through thing too,
That's
which is
true.
it's fairly interesting experience because it usually turns into you staring at a wall for 3 hours.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a different pace from like a normal like gameplay walkthrough, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so I think we could dive into some of beyond the general hype. There is I think that we both agree and I haven't seen anything to the contrary that the topic and what seems like we might get some answers this time around
Mm.
of things that we were wondering about. And one of the big things that I know you were discussing, and I think it fits interestingly with what we've seen now, is the land of shadow as a like spirit world or Helfen. Where do you sort of sit with that now in your speculation?
I would say at this point I am not completely ruling it out, but the Land of Shadow is definitely um, a bit more. There is more complexity to it than just being this is the afterlife. You
Hmm
know, the I think it's not completely ruled out that it has some relation to it. There is some stuff in the trailer that look spirit worthy, that look death related.
hmm
Um, I think a lot of people have also pointed out like the whole candle tree with the Helfen thing with the lamp,
Yeah.
candle lamp
Yeah.
thingies. Yeah. So I think it can still be there and it can work out in interesting ways. But now I'm not completely convinced, but it really seems to me that the Land of Shadow used to be just a landmass in the lands between at some
Mhm.
point, maybe on the middle of the map, which is not exactly what I would have imagined.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say it's doesn't mean it can't have the underworld in it. I mean, even in various mythologies, you're gonna have the underworld being literally a cave
Yeah.
behind that hill over there. So there's definitely some elements of that, but I would say at this point I'm more intrigued as to what exactly it is. I said it in my video, but the the Raya Lucaria guy, the John Lucaria guy,
Mhm.
who's in that room that's straight out of Raya Lucaria. See, that's what's really like messing with me the most,
Yeah.
because it really looks like something that has no business being there, even if we try to, work it around the fact that it used to be in the middle of the map, etc. So I'm just really curious at this point to exactly find out what it is.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially that point about John Lucaria, as you put it, and just that whole thing, because that does feel like a lot of it I can kind of track with, like especially knowing that America, this is where she ascended, whether or not that was in the lands between or obscured. I'm assuming my speculation right now is it was obscured after she did what she did, but that's a
Hmm.
point of speculation right now. But the fact that the Golden Order and her ascension is kind of tied in a lot of ways with Destined Death, I agree that it still feels like this could end up being a sort of afterlife, sort of maybe even because of the circumstances of how exactly she did things.
Yeah,
And
there's
you know,
definitely
yeah, and as far as Karya, I have no reason and I have no speculation really about why, why that's there in particular. I know that, I don't think there's anything, I haven't seen any theories. It's something people are generally like, "Oh, and that's there," which is interesting.
yeah. One thing I have been musing about ever since the trailer, like, a lot of different ideas and things came up after having released my video, which is a shame. But the I have been musing about all these characters and all these lands and civilizations or fiefdoms that are supposed to sound like they are supposed to be related to the lands between, but we don't see any trace of
Mhm.
stuff like the Sun Realm, Aeocade, that are nowhere to be found. Now I'm starting to think if they are there in the lands of Shadow. And in relation to John Lucaria specifically, now I'm thinking back about for example, the Golem Crafter, right? Which
Mm.
seems to have been somewhere in Liurnia related because of the
Yeah.
Crystallians, right? And he's an important character that's supposed to possibly might return at some point. So he's
Yeah.
away. So I started considering if maybe he isn't the Raya Lucaria Golem Crafter guy, for example.
Oh, that's a very interesting theory because yeah, that some of that stuff is on the table, and unlike Dark Souls and the Souls games generally, there are many lands in the lands between is sort of the conceit of the open world. So like Aeocade having like disappeared, like that seems like it's right for
Yeah.
tying into it. And the Golem Crafter would be really cool because I know one of your things is the Black Rock civilization and the golems and just we
Hmm.
don't get much about them, and it seems like maybe the DLC they might be old even in the DLC for all I know, like ancient, but the idea of
Yeah.
getting more about those things is really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. There is the one of the things I'm the most excited about, which I is one of those things which I'm fairly confident is going to be addressed in DLC. I mean, it's almost basically in the synopsis, is the whole Glowmite Queen slash Marika's ascension to godhood. I had made a video like about a year ago about my theory was basically the Glowmite Queen would be the previous god, and Marika would have to have waged a war to usurp her, basically.
Mhm.
And the DLC seems to be about that war, or that's
Yeah.
but we got. are going to uncover in the Lands of Shadow. I had speculated that the Glowmite Queen might not be completely dead, and since
Yeah.
she was Placidus Saxon's god, she's fled somewhere. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying she's in the DLC, but I'm saying she's in the DLC.
Well, it's interesting with the Glowmite Queen because still a big point of debate and obviously related to America's ascension in a lot of ways. And when I was watching that video of yours, and it's a bit of a tinfoil hat sort of crackpot theory, but I had the thought for a moment. I was like, what if Mesmer is actually like the Glowmite Queen's son, and we were misinterpreting Mother? Like it was like a bait and switch, and that's why he has all these dragon things, is because he is
Yeah.
a dragon or something crazy like that.
I mean, there is multiple angles you can approach that. The different variations of crackpot are infinite. There is this whole theory that Marika is the Glowmite Queen, so it could be both,
Yeah.
so, so that Marika was the Glowmite Queen and he's her son. I think Mesmer is such a big question mark. Is actually incredible the amount of questions he introduces.
Hmm.
And since you mentioned Crackpot and him being a son of the Glowmite Queen, I'm just gonna go one level higher on the on the Crackpot theory here. I had this thing, I call it the Rizzler Marika theory, where Mesmer has all these features that make it look like he's a son of Radagon,
Hmm.
and also all these features that make him look like he's the son of potentially the Glowmite Queen. So what if he's the son of Marika, in the sense that Rani is the daughter of Marika? So he is actually from Radagon and the Glowmite Queen. And that's the Rizzler theory, which is whenever whenever Marika comes up against a powerful adversary queen that she can't get rid of easily, she just sends Radagon her way
Yeah.
to try to subdue her. There you go.
Man, yeah. No, I like it though. This is the time for this kind of speculation because this is when
Yeah.
we're ripe for all the sort of fun theories. And it's interesting because I think it's been brought up as a criticism, which I don't necessarily think it's a detriment to the game, but also is something I won't turn my nose up at, is that it's been brought up, and I think Ratatosker brought this up, is that he sort of mentioned that with like Gwyn and other sort of big figures in the world in past games, you've
Mhm.
understood their motivation pretty well. Whereas
Yeah.
Marika has been the opposite. Like she is like a great way to start arguments online. If you want to talk
Yeah.
about your opinions on America, did she kill her children? Is she sad? Like there's so many different approaches, and none of them you can totally, well, you can discount a whole bunch of them, but you can't discount like there's multiple kind of valid sounding approaches. And I'm so interested to see how much this actually answers it, because on the one hand I'm excited to see From Software maybe addressing some stuff, and it seems like it's because this is content that they held back sort of intentionally for scope reasons. But also,
Yeah.
there's part of me that can't let myself believe that FromSoft is really going to give us too many answers. And I think Mesmer is actually a great example of that, because he raises so many more questions than he answers just by existing right now. And we're going to learn a lot about him, but I am curious, like, how how many theories will this DLC actually shoot down about America? Or is it going to be this thing where we're still like, you could still just pull from the DLC now as an extra source for your pet theory?
Yeah, I think definitely what's gonna happen is that it's gonna shoot down a lot of theories, but also many more will emerge anyways.
Yeah.
And people will find things to reinforce their theory from the DLC, even though
Yeah.
there are multiple different confliction theories. They will each find things to reinforce their stuff. Is probably what's gonna happen. But it's really, that's the fun. Like that's the
Yeah.
fun of the whole process. The
Exactly.
the way I try to like put it into word and describe it is that the lore aspect of these games is to me just as it's a gameplay. It's
Hmm.
part of the gameplay. Like it is a game in and of itself. There is, for example, usually have people who like PvE, people who like PvP, people who like the lore. Well, the lore is a game in and of itself, trying to piece together the story and do all the research for that. And I just appreciate all the different aspects of these games. So to me,
Yeah,
like the lore is no different from the PvP, for example. And
yeah.
so when the DLC is gonna come out and it's gonna have a bunch of new information, it's gonna like basically annihilate like most of the videos I have made so far.
Oh yeah. Oof.
It's I'm not really sitting there being like, damn,
Yeah.
my theories are wrong. I'm like, okay, well, now it's like a patch. It's like a balance patch,
Yeah.
basically. And now it's like a new game that starts with new information. We try to piece a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And I thought about that way before, especially when the Souls games and Elden Ring, bring in so many different interests as your like primary focus, and what people get out of these games is so vast. But another thing I like about the comparison is like you could almost apply it directly to those other things where there's kind of like a meta, but that
Yeah.
also From Software doesn't design one build to be the best. They don't design one interpretation of the story to be correct. You won't solve Elden Ring, you just play it, and that includes the story to some extent.
I've been wondering about so many times about this question because now with Elden Ring, they have this slightly different approach, which it's also one of the reasons why I'm so much more like engaged in Elden Ring's lore compared to Dark Souls. It's not that I don't like Dark Souls lore or don't know it, but in Elden Ring, I have more faith of the backbone, like the world building that was done for it. I have more faith that it's actually something consistent and it's not
Yeah.
a From Software like retconning things left and right to make sense of things in Dark Souls 2, in Dark Souls 3, etc.
Yeah.
So there is definitely this aspect of it, and I was wondering if From Software was ever gonna actually give us answers, right? And usually in Dark Souls, not so much. It would be like the standard would, but with Elden Ring, because they have all this material like laying around, and they did say, I believe, before release that they used most of it,
Yeah.
but evidently not all of it, simply coming from stuff they purposefully don't give us because they don't want us to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was wondering if they would actually like go somewhere completely different and extend the universe, or if they would actually like tackle things in the lands between and give us answers. And it seems like in the DLC they are leaning more towards the give us answers parts, is what it seems like to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And it's kind of been interesting with the trajectory, and maybe this is just Elden Ring lore brain rot. But I was thinking about how the Colosseum like update DLC, whatever you want to call it, was a PvP edition, and it was a little less substantial than I think some people were hoping as far as adding content. But I
Mhm.
also thought it was interesting how they added these Colosseums back in, and then like some of the main topics people have been discussing are item descriptions discussing the Colosseums, and I was like, are you guys like working backwards in a timeline on purpose? Like, because you're like bringing up like Age of Godfrey with the Colosseums, and now
Yeah.
you're like sort of digging into older history. I'm curious, yeah, to your point that just like what they're thinking about there. I think that was just bringing in a mechanic, but I am curious to know if they debated, just because I know that the Colosseums and some of the item descriptions around them and placement of certain enemies related to the Colosseums kind of changed pretty shortly before release. So it is
Mhm.
interesting, like, you know, at what point in the story they decided, well, we're gonna rip this stuff out. Like we didn't see Mesmer or anything, so maybe Mesmer's a newer addition, but also this whole snakes thing. Like it is very interesting to wonder what level they pulled out and when they sort of decided that chunk they weren't going to have scope for. I struggle between thinking, oh, it's probably pretty early because From Software, one of their things that I think makes them good developers is that they're pretty ready to scrap content if they don't think it's up to par or if they don't have time for it. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's interesting to think about, and especially given how I know that they revisited the scope after the success of Elden Ring and the DLC plans. It's curious to see like if this slots in how conveniently, does this answer stuff like you're saying, or how much, more did they add in? It's interesting to think if they really had a whole big ass DLC worth of new things and answers for us or not.
Yeah, and the thing I would like to come back to the thing you said about just going back, how they are like going backward in their timeline, kind of with the content, and it kind of that I think that's a really good idea. It's really nice, and I wonder if this won't be the I guess the thread that guides the progression through the DLC. As in, we start off with the Shadowlands, etc., and as we go deeper and deeper into the DLC, we'll be like
Mm,
entering and learning and finding new stuff about things that are like further and further back in the timeline.
yeah,
You have stuff like the in there that could be like Newman related, which is like super ancient, like a Backstone civilization, and then it could start. Okay, we're gonna start off with the Shadowlands, America's ascension, the war that happened there, and then maybe even further and deeper in the DLC, just keeps diving further and further back. One of the things I'm really I feel like 90% is gonna be there. Is gonna we get some sort of confirmation, or we're gonna find the Crucible or learn more about it.
yeah,
And the Crucible might be the singularity, kind of like the starting point of the history of this world. So
yeah,
we might be working our way back through the timeline eventually until we reach like final boss room
yeah.
arena happens to be next to the Crucible or something like that.
Yeah, well, one of the things I loved about your video and is a testament to, taking a breath and watching the video for a few days instead of trying to like barf out some content after, which I tended to wait too, but I think if I had looked even closer, what you brought up about the Crucible Swamp, as I have dubbed it,
Mm,
but just the fact that everybody's calling it Death Blight, including myself, but then you'd notice like it kind of looks like that crucible color, that reddish gold, and that kind of
yeah.
seems like veins, and you see that in a few shots that seem to be in that area, and how that's sort of the bottom of the world as far as we can tell. Like maybe that's down, like maybe not underground, which we've also seen stuff of, but at least like you have all those plateaus. This seems to be on like the base level of the
Yeah,
overworld.
very tucked away for sure.
Yeah, and so I'm really interested about the Crucible too because we know about it, but also I think if you ask someone to explain it and you ask like five people, they would have slightly different explanations of it because, I think people tend to agree that the Crucible had a part in the creation of the Erdtree and all that, but I think the relationship between the Elden Ring and the Crucible
Yeah.
is not clear at all. And actually, until rewatching your videos, I hadn't really even thought about the idea of it being this sort of local source of creation energy. For some reason, I
Yeah.
had always associated it a bit with the Elden Ring as well. But the idea of it being this extra sort of catalyst outside of the Elden Ring is also very interesting, especially when you start to think of the implications for the Greater Will and the Elden Beast and like, you know, is the Elden Ring the only thing that it needs or does it need this catalyst? I'm interested to see what they sort of
Mm.
tell us about the Crucible with all this.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the biggest question mark. It's one of the things I'm the most excited about to find out. It's the you mentioned about how it's like this local source. It's even questionable if the relationship between when the relationship between the Crucible and the Elden Ring started. I think it's
Yeah.
perfectly valid to imagine that they came together in the Elden Star. Like the Elden Star contained both the Elden Beast and the Crucible. So, or that the Crucible was just sitting here and then the Elden Ring came in. But I think they are definitely like a pair that you have, they go hand in hand basically as far as their properties being tied to life. I think the Elden Ring is probably what the artifact of power that allows you to do things with the Crucible, notably maybe create life out of it. And the Crucible is, I guess, the pot that contains this mix of all these life, energy, genetic material, whatever substance that is basically the primordial matter that make from which like all life comes from. There is this concept that's in a lot of fantasy settings of this like primordial soup,
Yeah.
primordial sea that you can find. Like I think it was also kind of touched upon on in Armored Core with the I forgot what it's called, the red the
Oh,
red stuff.
the coral. I keep calling it
The
melange, not only
coral.
because I've been reading Dune and thinking about Dune, but because they originally called it melange, which is very telling about what they were pulling
Yeah.
from. But
Which is this primordial, like this amalgamation of
yeah,
all these consciousness melted down in a single like red substance. I feel like the I have a lot of opinions about the lore of Elden Ring, and what I do in my videos, I give those opinions. I'm not really listing all the different options we have. I'm just like, oh, here's this idea. This is what I think is the case. But even though I can have like pretty cut and dry opinions about certain stuff, even if they are proven wrong or correct later, the one of the biggest question marks for me is just how does it play out? How does this Elden Ring Crucible duality play out? Because I think they are essential to one another. I don't think one can do much without the other. So
yeah,
I'm really curious as to how that turns out.
yeah. And I think with just the word, crucible, how you have that whole like inner like that mixing and stuff, and just knowing that From Software loves sort of like double entendres and multiple meanings, having that also tied in with this whole conquest idea and this whole like,
Yeah.
not to get too berserk, but like struggling idea that you need to struggle to sort of like ascend, sort of thing, is I see all that at play. That's part of what's made the Crucible interesting, and like you're saying, like this catalyst, and also like how that works exactly. And because I do think, you know, I did like the moment when you're first playing through Elden Ring and you realize the Golden Order is all about that propaganda even more than maybe you thought. And you're like, oh, you're not even the first goddess. You're not the first kingdom, even a little bit. Like, you're like,
Yeah.
who knows how far down the line. But that transfer of power, I'm so glad they're tackling that, because I just think having some insight into that is going to open up a lot of avenues for interpretation and just speculation about sort of the greater universe. Because yeah, just that how like, and as you brought up with the Glow My Queen, like I think a lot of people forget, and it's even easy for me to forget about, is like, where did Marika get the Elden Ring from? Was she just given it by the greater will? Like,
Yeah.
what happened before, like at that point? Like, was it the Crucible itself? Like, what exactly was happening? So I'm so glad they're tackling that. And I think I've wondered if the substance spilling out, like that molten sap stuff, like,
Mhm.
man, that has so much Crucible imagery, not just with the shape of the building looking like it's pouring into it, but just like even the color is kind of reminiscent of like Crucible related stuff. It's not quite as bronzy and red tinged, but like, man, I can't wait to see, because it's obviously such a thing that, and we didn't get enough of it in the base game for to satiate my appetite for that particular vein of the story.
Yeah, for sure. There is even there was always this notion that the in some way the Crucible is coursing through the Erdtree nowadays,
Yeah,
which kind of made sense since it was made from it. But there is also this the DLC just introduces so many questions, like how does it even work out that um, if I'm talking as if like it's confirmed the Crucible is going to be there, but if the Crucible is going to be in the Shadowlands, and since they say that this is the place where the Erdtree was born, how does it work out that this thing is now like in a different sort of like obscured
yeah,
dimension? And is that the reason why the Erdtree can seem illusory? This whole
yeah,
debate about is the Erdtree like illusory or not? Um, I'm on the side that it's not. It's very physical, but
yeah,
it's not without reason that people think it's illusory, because it's very purposeful by From Software that they made it transparent.
yeah,
I At some point I used to think it was a bug, because
yeah,
if you use your binoculars, you get the trunk of the Earth respawning in like instantly, and you could
yeah,
see it. But as it turns out, when I went back and checked the concept art, the Earth is slightly translucent even in the concept art. So From Software has done something really nasty, which they do sometimes. Sometimes they really try to like lead us astray. But the Erdtree is supposed to look translucent from afar, but only from afar.
Yeah.
And if you get close enough, it has an actual like physical wooden trunk inside of it, and that's
Yeah.
what leads to these conflicting opinions, I guess, of its illusory world. But that's done on purpose by From Software, you know.
Yeah.
And yes, I wonder if that relates to the whole like Shadowlands situation.
It feels difficult for me to think it's not like somewhat related. And it raises so many questions. Just, yeah, like I've wondered if the Crucible is part of like the Land of Shadow and that America has separated it for reasons like if you're seeing it as sort of transparent because the Erdtree is sort of straddling those worlds with its connection to the Crucible, or if it's a case of there was a more physical tree that existed. Maybe even like the Great Tree has kind of been disproven somewhat as a translation issue, but of there being a prior sort of important tree that America burned in order to ascend, and this is sort of standing in its place as the Golden Order tree, as a visual
Yeah.
difference, and it's made magically using this stuff, and yeah, there's just so many ways it can go, and sort of tied to that. And I think it's the other end of the DLC, which is Mikola, which we can't
Mhm.
forget. And Mikola's motivation is sort of the present day, the plot of the DLC, I guess.
Yeah.
And your thoughts on Mikola going here. Like, I think we're both in a bit of agreement that Godwin is still very possible to be in play. Like, I still very much
Mhm.
like that idea, but also bringing up the Crucible. If the Crucible is really important, could Mikola be traveling there because Crucible reasons, or both? Who knows?
I think it could be both. I think Godwin is definitely still in play, and we could like talk about also the whole Shadow Earth tree situation and potentially the other tree around it. But I think it's very likely that Mikola is there for the Crucible based on the. I believe there was a line in the website for the DLC where it said that Mikola is walking in Marika's footstep,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Like, or maybe it was an interview or something where Miyazaki is saying, okay, well, Marika did something there, and Marika is walking, and Mikola is kind of retreading her footsteps in the Shadowlands. Marika definitely touched, did things to the Crucible.
Yeah.
Um, so I think this kind of implies that that's why Mikola is there. In my video, I noted in the end that Mikola looks very, very golden, very
Yes.
radiant and golden,
Yeah.
when supposedly he should be like divested of his gold when he enters the
Yeah.
DLC.
Yeah, and I think we both noticed that you don't see the baldachin in the sky, and the tree
Yeah.
looks a little weird. It's not, it doesn't have this the sap or whatever flowing from it. So there's stuff going on there. It feels a little suspicious.
Yeah. And as for Godwin, I feel like Mikela's motivation seems probably tied to that. I originally speculated that's why he would go to this quote unquote spirit world. It's because of the soulless demigods and the whole eclipse thing. But the fact that you still need Tukiradan, which I think has to do with the eclipse, or rather the fact that he's holding the stars in general at the very least, to enter the DLC, and whole, the whole concept of the Shadowlands being possibly closely tied to the eclipse. As you know, when you have an eclipse, it means you obscure the original source of light, and you cast a shadow,
Yeah.
usually over a vast stretch of land, potentially hiding it. but but yeah, there is this whole thing about I don't know if you ever heard of this, but there is this whole idea of the relationship between the crucible and the sun.
Yeah.
um, you know how in Dark Soul you have this imagery of the sun being the dark sign,
Yep.
and at the end of Dark Souls 3 you have this image of the eclipsed sun dripping his like red energy thingy
Yeah.
into the kiln of the first flame, which is very reminiscent of a crucible being emptied, and the whole imagery of the eclipse, especially in the eclipsed like equipment of the Mausoleum Knights, is that it seems to be like dripping something. So there is this whole thing about the sun being analogous to the crucible and the eclipse being how you drain it. Is the eclipse sun
Mm,
is described as drained of color, so drained of power. You know how you would drain the goldness, the
yeah,
gold from this golden star. And there is this whole parallel between the sun, the crucible, how they tie into the eclipse, and the shadowlands. One idea that I found like that really intrigues me is that the Erdtree kind of took the place of the sun in the lands between when it became, the Erdtree, the center of fate. It has all these characteristics that are usually associated with the sun,
yeah,
and the sun itself is just never talked about in Elden Ring. Basically, it's like completely non-existent. So there is this idea that thematically the Erdtree has eclipsed the sun. You know,
yeah,
it has eclipsed it, and the Shadowland could be the result, or I guess, this place that is in the shadow cast by the Erdtree, which is it goes back to this whole theory that the Shadowland could potentially be also the Sun Realm. Okay, I'm I'm
yeah.
talking way too much. It keeps the tangents keep going left and right. I'm sorry.
No, but I think that's part of it though. Is there's so much that seems to be getting pulled from, and it seems almost and it seems pretty thematic and intentional. Be considering that like Mesmer is such a chimera of imagery, and I feel like
Mhm.
we're just seeing just this whole thing, and I know it's for a purpose, and I just can't quite wrap my mind around it yet because we don't know quite enough, and I wouldn't want to know enough until I actually play it. But I just love it's so ripe for potential. And I think what you're saying about the sun makes a lot of sense in the eclipse, and I wish I could remember what video it was and what the explanation was, but as far as I know, like an eclipse also has maybe some different cultural like cachet in Japan, or like Japanese culture may have
Mhm.
a different interpretation of an eclipse, which I wish I could remember what it is now, but it's sort of an interesting. It was almost a more positive association than what I was normally thinking. I think, but there's so much at play there, and what you're saying about the sun in a game that is so big about stars, and they just
Yeah.
don't talk about the sun. It seems very intentionally that it's just not important when it really should be, considering how important it is in other From Software games. So I do think that the Erdtree has kind of stepped in that sense, and I'm wondering if maybe even that becomes, like you're saying, the Sun Realm. Like maybe that's even part of the Golden Order's whole thing, is that it's the Erdtree has replaced the sun, and that has relations to death and who knows whatever stuff, and now it's my turn to start bringing in tangential things, so
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There is a it it could go just so many ways, and I think they seem supported in what we see in the trailer. It's interesting that you bring up the whole death thing. One of the things I wanted to see more explored in the DLC was the relationship between sleep and death, and
hmm
like Saint Trina and all of that.
yeah.
Uh, I, I can you tell what that boss with the boomerang is? Because it's extremely strange.
Yeah, is cute and horrifying looking, which is From Software's like greatest visual design trick. But yeah, I mean, because the horse looks like it's kind of melting, so but it's also being like torn apart. Because at first I was like, is this like a Clayman thing? But then it's like very death imagery with like the skeleton, the horse being pulled apart. The fact that the horse and the rider kind of seem like they're not necessarily separate things. Like
Yeah.
it's a cool design, and it's gross as hell, which also I'm very much for. I don't need Elden Ring to be Dark Souls, but man, the DLC has some real Dark Souls level of like grim darkness that Elden Ring didn't normally have as the full game. So I just so many good images.
Yeah, and they still manage to keep the goofiness, like
Yeah,
always, and
always.
that's what I love about their design so much.
Yeah.
Even uh, to the Death Horse guy, like his design is at the same time cool looking and unique and super like goofy, and he also is like super on the nose. Like this is some Nito from Dark Souls
Yeah,
level of I am death
yeah,
on this guy.
seriously.
But yeah, then you have the worm also, the
Oh yeah,
classic, the the boy, the big boy.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. And I think you mentioned just Saint Trina and death, which has been something I've always been interested in, and from the network test was clocking because it's a From Software sort of trope too. The similarities between sleep and death, and I find it
Mhm.
so interesting in the marketing, almost what they don't talk about, but what's obviously there. And we see a lot of death imagery, and we see a lot of Saint Trina imagery, but they're not
Uh-huh.
brought up. Like they talk about just Mikola, not Saint Trina, and I'm like, oh, like what is going on there? But I think that's exciting because whatever is going on with those two things, they don't want us to know right now. So
Uh, yeah, I think it also comes from a place we like that's like Centrina being Mikela is like illegal lore. Like everyone takes it for granted today, but we're not supposed to know that technically. Like it was only spelled out in cut content.
yeah,
So it's probably like a revelation that they're gonna have in the DLC or a twist or something like that. Something relating to that. Like maybe Centrina is not exactly Mikela or a variation of Marika and Radagon and all of that.
yeah, that would be interesting. I do like how it feels like we are getting kind of the DLC that we want, but not like beat for beat exactly how we thought we would get it. How there seems to
Yeah.
be like it's not that simple, and that's sort of From Software all the time. But like, it's not just like a spirit realm, but maybe it is still. Like they managed to
Yeah.
make it somehow like everything we want, and also this.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And I think I think we'll wrap it up here. But one last thing, I was just curious, and this is a small topic, but you mentioned it in your video, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Is the belfries in the DLC that we see, like the one image that looks like a belfry, and just the
Yeah.
mechanical function, how that usually takes us somewhere in the game ahead of when we're supposed to see it, and the potential there. Like, there's not much to like
Uh,
speculate on from it, but um, that just made me very excited. I'm curious, like your thoughts about that too, because what is it showing us something early? Do you think maybe it's a transportation thing? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Part of me, okay, I'm so excited about it. Part of me wanted to be something unexpected because, of course, it's new and
Yeah.
unexpected. And part of me also wanted to be like the spoiler belfry that we got in the base game. Uh, I if it's the spoiler belfry that's gonna like take you somewhere crazy, I wonder if it's not gonna take us to like the blue field that we see in the trailer, perhaps. That blue field is actually like so fascinating to me, and it
Mm-hmm.
seems so different from the rest of the Shadowlands.
It
Like
does.
the other different locales, you can kind of compute why they look different. Okay, this is in some tucked away in some valley. This is underground, whatever. But then you have that blue field who seems to be in the open, and you can't really map it to the rest of the Shadowlands. It doesn't have the same like it doesn't have the wheat everywhere. It doesn't have the ghostly tombstones. It looks like the lands between, and I mean a lot. These like big moaning graves that there is in Castle Morn and around Lanedale, and these like tablets that you can see on cliffs in the base game of Elden Ring. They are not in the Shadowlands, but you can actually find them in abundance there, like in the blue field, which I thought was really, really like intriguing in and of itself, just how different it is from the rest of the map.
Yeah, and the fact that it's got those ships, and
Oh yeah.
like I thought maybe you could kind of map some of the rockiness that sort of that Mount Gelmir sort of rockiness that we see over to the like the right hand side of like the
Yeah.
main shot, but it's not quite that either, and that would be really interesting if it takes you somewhere else. I mean, like where do you go that you're not supposed to see in a land that's obscured?
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah,
the, it the potential.
yeah, that, like
I just get
the
excited.
I know. I'm so excited for it, and it'll be interesting. The one sort of tragic downside to this release date is that I go on vacation to Maine, which is like my favorite time of the year. I go on vacation with my family for a week to Maine, and I'm going on like June 23rd, and that kills me because I'm like, am I going to experience the DLC for the first time on like Steam Deck, or do I like wait? Like, how do I do this? Like, Steam Deck's good, and I've been doing a little bit of that for my playthrough. I've been using my
Yeah.
partner's Steam Deck, but like, it's also not the same. And I'm like, oh, but I don't want to be a week behind the conversation. I love being part of like the conversation, even if I'm not generating a video. It's nice to be caught up.
Yeah.
And if I don't play for a week, I'm gonna have to come back and like bury my head and just get it done without like looking at anything. And that's tough for me.
Yeah, that's tough, and I have the same problem. I might be traveling on the 21st.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
trying. I'm trying. I'm trying to squeeze out of it. I'm
Yeah.
trying to get away from it, but yeah, family stuff. Sometimes it's not so easy.
I know. I was like, "What's the cancellation policy for the hotel?" And my partner is just like, "No." And I was like, "Oh, fair enough." And I do like my beach time, but it's the From Software finds a way to just squirm into even the most precious times of my life and just hit me with something. But
Yeah, I'm just glad it's not too far away, and we
ah,
we get some stuff in the meantime to play.
yeah,
Um, I didn't ask you yet. I'm curious. Did you get a chance to play Dragon's Dogma yet?
I haven't, and so I've never played any Dragon's Dogma. But
Oh boy.
um, the actually I played Dragon's Dogma briefly once, the first one, but and I didn't get it. I didn't get anything regarding two yet. I didn't get any codes or anything, which I'm not surprised about. But I am very interested in two, and I'm trying to like run the numbers. Like, do I just play one first, get around to it? Do I play two? Because at the time of us recording, like reviews have just come out, and it's got like a 90 Metacritic or something.
Nice.
So it's like people are happy generally with it, and I'm hearing stuff I want to hear, which is like not following modern gaming trends and just iterating on what it did previously, and exploring that path instead of like buying into the modern day stuff. And I'm like, I'm so there for a company because it feels sort of From Software where they're just like, we make our thing and we don't care what other people are doing unless we think it's cool, and then maybe we'll borrow it. So
Yeah, it's definitely like Dragon's Dogma 1 is one of my all-time favorite games and has some of my all-time favorite moments. It had so much jank and so much issues, but even still it's just I just love it so much. I'm just glad I, I'm just glad we get to play. I have been trying so hard this last this last week trying to like finish my Eternal City video to try to release it before
mm,
Dragon's Dogma.
yeah.
I failed. Spoilers. It's not happening. But uh,
Oh, I
but
feel
yeah,
that.
no, now it's gonna be delayed for a couple of weeks at least
Yeah.
because I'm gonna play Dragon's Dogma. I definitely think it's worth getting into. Like even it's super easy to bounce off of. Probably like Dragon's Dogma 2 will be easier to onboard like new people. It's not gonna be as jank as the first one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely getting into. It's one of the most like it has a unique brand of fantasy RPG that you can't find in like other games in the industry. It has pretty cool combat and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very interested in it. I'm very much down for what it's putting out. And I think the reason I bounced, it was a stupid reason. Sometimes this month maybe the theme is me revisiting things and realizing I was the problem, and maybe I just should have chosen a better time. Dune, I finally watched Dune Part 1. I just read through the book last week cuz I heard a bunch of people excited about Part 2. I
Yeah.
thought the Dune Part 1 was boring. I fell asleep twice watching it. I thought it was visually very cool, but the pace in the story was not. I was not getting my attention. I kept falling asleep. I watched it in two sessions, which I think was a smart choice for me, just because I wasn't gonna let myself fall asleep again. But not only was it visually interesting, but with the context of the book, I was so much more into it. And I think with Dragon's Dogma, I was really on a Souls bender. And what happened to me was I was so much in the Souls mindset of saving that
Mhm.
I went a very long stretch without saving in Dragon's Dogma and died at night.
Oh
And
no.
I was like, fuck this game. like like I just lost like a 45 minutes. I'm over it. Like
So unfortunately, that was my like I was having fun, and then that happened, and I was like, no, like I'm over it. I'm so mad about this, but I don't think it was a fair shake against the game because also you should just have good saving habits, but I didn't, and that's on me. So I should give it a revisit.
Now, for sure, I think the good news is that there might be a good autosave system now. Like it's Dark Knight 2.
I was curious
Don't
about
quote me on that.
that. I was
I'm
like,
not sure.
if I play 2 first, if I get into it, I'm like, that's one thing I gotta promise myself. Roll with the save system, figure it out first thing. Don't let that be the thing that keeps me from playing the game. But
I'm just super excited. Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking just hype about the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. It's finally coming after quite a while. It feels like
Yeah.
It's
For years.
I'm not seeing so much discussion about if it'll live up to the time now that people see it, and I'm all about quality over quantity, but I think they're going to deliver a heaping dose of both from what we can
Yeah.
tell. And man, I'm so excited for it and so excited to see like reignite all these like lore discussions and see if maybe this is the answer for some people who were especially bummed that they couldn't clock
Yeah.
America's motivations, and maybe this will give people more to chew on in a way that's satisfying, even if they still. I think my prediction is From Software is not gonna completely button things up for us, but it'll probably give us enough to maybe nudge people in the right direction who felt like there wasn't quite enough context.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think that's probably what's gonna happen. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Content wise, I'm sure it's gonna deliver. I think it speaks volume to the content that we were here for like more than an hour and we didn't like get through half our talking points
Oh,
just
I
that we
know.
got from the trailer.
I know that's what I was looking at because I was like, I was my behind the scenes plan as I was like, okay, we're gonna talk like a half hour, 45 minutes because it's for a DLC, and then maybe I'll record another like Elden Wait thing before I get my kids off the bus at 2:30, and then no, I should have known though. I've done this so many times that I don't know why I keep tricking myself into thinking if Elden Ring, then I will talk about it with someone for like at least an hour. And it's just, I don't have I can't go less. That's just how Elden Ring works. Even if we literally only have a 3-minute trailer and an image that's.
And there you have it, two From Software nerds gushing about an upcoming DLC that they haven't even played yet, but having the best time. Thank you so much to Kosmos for coming on the Elden Wait. I had a lot of fun talking about our speculation. I'm looking forward to seeing his content once the DLC releases and we have our new theories of everything now that we have what is seemingly the full picture of Elden Ring. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you want to follow me on my journey to Shadow the Erdtree, please subscribe to the Lore Hunter and make sure to turn notifications on so you get videos as they come out. Thanks for watching.